Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's CPD session. And so today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Aimee Merridew from Keele University and our very own Nathalie Tasler. And they're going to talk to us about Blackout poetry as a tool for teaching and learning in HE.
Thank you very much. Can I just, before we kick off, can I check that you can see my slides? Fab.
Yep.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, both Nathalie and I are absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you so much for making the time to come and spend a couple of hours with us today. Nathalie and I have absolutely loved talking about Blackout poetry together, so it's going to be fantastic to chat with you all about it and see how you either do or might want to use this tool yourself in your own practices. Nathalie, would you like to say a few words before we kick off?
No, just that I'm looking forward to it, and as usual, looking forward and working with you on something. So yeah, let's go.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, today we're going to be talking about Blackout poetry as a tool for teaching and learning in higher education, and what we're really hoping that will come out from our conversations today is just how versatile this tool is and how many ways it can be used and in different subject areas and for different types of activities. So in terms of the, I guess, our plans for this workshop, so we'll begin by giving some background and context, both like introductions to ourselves in case you don't know us, but also in terms of how we've been using it ourselves in our own practices. We will then, I'm just going to minimize the cameras, there we are. We'll then talk about what Blackout poetry is and why we use it as a teaching and learning tool. We'll share some examples from our own practices and also students' experiences. And again, I think that's what's particularly exciting is we've been using it with students across year groups and to see just how they ran with this activity themselves, you know, whatever stage you're at in their degree or what subject area. That's particularly exciting. So hopefully that'll be interesting for you to see. And then we're really keen to explore with you how you might use or adapt this method in your own context. So we've got a few activities where you can have a go at making your own Blackout poem, either from your own source material if you've come prepared with some, or we've got a speech that you can use to redact to make your poem. And we'll have a bit of a discussion as well about the opportunities and maybe challenges that we might encounter when we're using this type of method. So there'll be sort of a discussion opportunity later on in the workshop. And then we'll finish up just by recapping what we feel are some of the implications for teaching and learning, particularly with regards to academic reading. So please do share your own ideas and thoughts there. So that's our plan for the workshop. We're sort of, it's a 2-hour workshop. We can take it, it could be quite a relaxed setting. So feel free to get up and have a break if you want. But we'll kick off now then. So I'll give a quick introduction to myself. I'm not too sure if the people in the room are from Glasgow University. I'm from Keele in Staffordshire, so I'll let you know who I am. So I'm a part-time PhD student in English literature at Keele. I'm sort of coming to the end of it, thankfully. I taught in the School of English from 2017 to 2021, and that's the sort of context that I'll be drawing upon today in terms of how I've used it. Currently, though, I'm a curriculum developer in the Keele Institute for Innovation and Teaching Excellence, also at Keele, and my sort of specialism is student success, particularly around academic skills and embedding them into the curriculum. Throughout these different roles, so both in the School of English and also my work as a sort of academic developer, I found that a common issue is that students and staff often struggle to read for academic purposes. They do lots of reading usually, but they necessarily don't, particularly students, understand the steps that they're taking in order to read for a specific purpose in mind. So they often read lots, and I used to do this myself, take lots and lots of notes, but not necessarily have a focus. So that's a sort of common issue that I've encountered across year groups and also across subject areas. So that's kind of got me really interested in thinking about how we can support students to build their academic reading literacies through disciplinary teaching and learning. So for me, initially, that was specifically in English teaching subjects, but more broadly now, just across the subject areas, thinking about how they can build these skills through their degree programs and through the teaching and learning that they engage in. So I've just included my contact details at the bottom of the slide. If you're interested in having a conversation with me after this workshop, I'd love to hear from you. So please do get in touch. I'll hand over to you, Nathalie.
Hi, I'm Nathalie. I'm working in the academic and digital development team here at Glasgow University. And I'm leading a course on creative pedagogies for active learning, developing education inquiries, and the ed dissertations. I'm also in the steering committee for the Creative HE organization. This is where all these overlaps happen. And I'm lead curator for the National Teaching Repository for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning section, and the director of impact and practice there. And also have my blog, and in the blog also have 2 posts, I think, on Blackout poetry. And yeah, so I've been introducing this in our Creative Pedagogies for Active Learning course to colleagues, and I've also talked to other colleagues about it, but we'll talk about that later in a bit more.
Thank you. Are you okay for me to move on? Okay, so before we give I guess a quick definition of what we actually mean by blackout poetry, in case it's not familiar to you, first we'll just kick off with, I guess, a provocation that Nathalie and I are quite interested in, and which I guess is at the heart of a lot of our conversations about why we think blackout poetry is such a fantastic method of reading. But we'll think about first what the challenges of academic reading are, though. So it's a core practice in students learning across subject areas, and obviously our practices as well as academics and educational professionals. Yet most or many students struggle to read for academic purposes, particularly if they're in their earlier stages of their degree, perhaps. There's often a common assumption that students know how to read critically, so they've got to university, that we just assume that they know how to read. But and I say this all the time whenever I talk to anyone about academic reading. Really, I think my idea of what academic reading is or can be was really transformed actually probably the second year into my PhD, when I went along to an academic reading retreat ran by a colleague called Angela Reed. And actually I learned that I'd been making my reading really difficult for myself over the years. I knew how to read, and I knew how to be critical, but I hadn't really thought about how I was approaching it, and I should have brought it with me now actually. But I always use an example of a novel that I'd used for when I was an undergraduate student in a class, and Nathalie and I were talking about this yesterday. Pages and pages and pages were just all highlighted in pink highlighter, just the whole page, and like pretty much every page was like that. So at the time I thought that everything was important, but of course that makes it quite difficult when I was then writing about this novel in one of my assessments to actually go back and look through it. I had to read it all again. I hadn't sort of distinguished between points or any themes that were particularly speaking to me. So actually that was really my second year of my PhD that I'd actually started thinking about how I was reading for academic purposes. So I always keep that in mind when I'm working with students in sort of academic skills sessions, to not make an assumption that they know how to read or that they're all at the same sort of stage in their reading and academic journey. And of course, in an ideal world, we would, as teachers, be building all of these opportunities to learn these skills into our courses. But of course, there's usually a lot of demand on terms of the amount of course content that needs to be delivered, which means we have to be quite creative about how we do it. But this can leave colleagues feeling like they've got little time to teach things like academic reading skills. So sometimes it can go untaught for students, and they sort of might go throughout their degrees struggling to read critically. So this means that often it's tends to be outsourced to sort of learning developers for university-wide sessions, but usually these tend to be optional. So again, not all students are able or know about these sessions. So again, they might not be getting that support. So this is a key challenge that I'm sure many of us are familiar with in terms of academic reading and academic skills more generally. So I mentioned earlier, this has sort of sparked a question of interest in terms of how we can support students to build their academic reading skills through disciplinary teaching and learning, so it's actually embedded into their courses. What strategies can they use to help them read critically? So these are the two questions that sort of really do stay at the forefront of my mind, and hopefully we'll be able to explore some, I guess, solutions to it throughout this workshop together. So that's where we come to Blackout poetry. What is Blackout poetry? So it's poetry that's created by redacting words from an existing document to create a new poem and new meaning. So I've included a screenshot on here where it's actually from, it's actually how I came across Blackout poetry, from a poetry collection by Isabel O'Hare called Always Can Be Yours. And the image on the slide, it's a redaction of like a press release. And what they've done is they've taken it, they've redacted it, and then they've made their own sort of narrative from it to counter the message in the original piece. So it's a very sort of political use of the method. But really, it's often compared to sort of heavily redacted like police files or FBI files. So you sort of lots of blacked out text and only a few words are usually left remaining. So why did I use it in my teaching? As I said, I first encountered this method of creation, I guess, but method of poetry creation through my PhD research. So I was looking at the pedagogical potential of collage methods and aesthetics, which is how I came across this method. But it got me thinking. I was teaching a composition course at the time in the School of English, and it got me thinking about how it actually holds a lot of promise for supporting students to read texts actively and critically, to engage with the words on the page, rather than just seeing sort of everything as key, actually to be a bit more selective in their essays that they were writing on it. And I thought this tool could be a really useful way for getting them to select particular words and themes. So when I brought it into that composition seminar, we were focusing on a picture of Dorian Gray. So I initially got students to use this method in order to engage in character analysis. So I gave them a handout of key sort of extracts from the novel and asked them to redact words in a way that summarized the character's traits or roles. So for Dorian, for example, they might be leaving behind words to do with, I don't know, like narcissism, beauty, all the things that we would sort of associate with Dorian. And of course, there's other characters in the novel that they wanted to focus on. So they were using it to summarize them really, and to encapsulate their personalities and their roles within the text. We also used it to identify key themes and social issues within the text. So they would again have their extract from the novel printed out, or if they were particularly brave, they might want to use their own copy. And they used it to identify key themes. So that might be to do with oppression, narcissism, abuse, all these kinds of themes that were particularly pertinent in the novel. We also used it to expose problems and limitations. So some of the students used it to rewrite moments in the text from queer and feminist perspectives, for example. So they almost spoke back to the text. So again, a more sort of political use of this method. And we've done this activity in both sort of like a paper-based and a digital sort of format. So I do have a few examples on the next few slides to show you how that worked in practice. But I guess the thing to emphasize here is that we were using this method in our sessions, but actually students went on to use this to help them plan their close reading essays. So they would use the extract that they'd been asked to close read and analyse, and they were actually using it to identify key themes or maybe words or moments that really spoke to them, that, you know, got them thinking, or they disagreed with, or got them excited. So actually they went on to use it to help them plan their assessment, as well as to help them build their reading skills during sessions. So I've got a few examples here from student work just to show you all of that in practice, really. So this is a student blackout poem of the extract from Dorian Gray. So the words that they've left behind are: "Of a portrait of beauty, the artist gave pleasure and fear." So here they're thinking about the portrait that's painted, and how it both portrays pleasure but also fear. Of course, Dorian becomes very scared of this portrait, so they were trying to think about aesthetics and beauty, but also the darker side to that in terms of the fear that it can create and the issues that can emerge. And then here's a digital example that a student made. So they've actually used a slightly different variation of the Blackout method here, in terms of they've not used the black Sharpie pen that the previous student had used. They've actually done it on a Word document, and they've left all of the text visible, but made the stuff that they wanted to redact in very pale, light, pale grey font, so that you can just about read it, but it's not the focus. And then they've highlighted the words in yellow that they want to emphasize. So here they've put, "He is the most wonderful person. Meet him, like him, love him. He wants to enslave you. Worship him, trust him. It will be different now." So this was the extract in which Sybil is talking about Dorian, and I think what the students done really well here is actually encapsulated the problematic relationship between Dorian and Sybil, because Sybil, is clearly sort of infatuated with Dorian here, but actually we get that sense of he's very abusive towards her, and very controlling, and we sort of get that tension between the beginning and the end of the extract. So it's really sad, but I think they've done a really good job there of capturing their relationship in the novel. So again, this student then went on in their assessment to do sort of like a feminist reading of the novel, and to explore the issues through that lens. And then this example that I've got on the slide here isn't from the same session, but it's actually from a outreach event that I did, and it was year 7. No, I've got it on the slide now. Year 9 and year 10 students. It was a mix of students. I don't know, different cohorts. And I just wanted to show you again just how creative people can get with their blackout poems. So this was actually, the examples here was from Frankenstein, but you can see that they've really tried to do very artistic representations of this method. And again, they are exploring particular themes in the novel that really spoke to them. But I just think it was fantastic what people can do in 20 minutes. So I thought I'd show that to you. And then just a final example before I start finishing up to pass over to Nathalie. I've actually been exploring this method with a colleague at Keele who's in chemistry, who came along to a similar workshop to this, and actually got really interested in the method in terms of bringing it into chemistry teaching. And Catherine has spoken about her use of the tool to encourage students to read scientific abstracts, and to sort of, I guess, get rid of the jargon, and use it just to keep the main sort of point or argument of a particular article, or the main issues that might be particularly pertinent to their learning on the course. So I have taken inspiration from Catherine and done my own blackout of an article from a scientific journal paper, all to do with cats. My cat was meowing at me at the time, so that was my inspiration with the cat as well. She was my muse. But I just wanted to show you another example from a scientific background in terms of how this method has been used to read critically and to understand abstracts and journal article writing. So just I guess a quick bit of feedback to share with you in terms of what students have said to me about their experiences of making Blackout poems. So this feedback comes from students in the composition course that I mentioned earlier, first year course in School of English. So students said that it made reading more fun, and it was an engaging way into the text. So some of the students just really didn't like the novel, and they found this activity actually made it fun to read. I think it's a brilliant novel, but that's just me. And they found it quite therapeutic in a way, being able to like, you know, destroy the page and to say something about it. So it made it more fun for them. It encouraged them to read slowly and closely, so it created familiarity with the language and the themes, which they might have sort of glossed over or ignored if they were reading more quickly. As with any sort of older text, the language that's used is often different to, you know, how we might speak today. So it forced them to sort of slow down and really familiarize themselves with the style of writing and language, and that in turn helped them to sort of pick up on the complexities of that language and how it might feed into themes. It prompted students to approach the text from different angles and theoretical perspectives, which, as I said earlier, this helped them to plan their assessments. So a couple of students did like a queer reading of the text, they did a feminist reading of the text, lots of different readings, and it was a way for them to again think critically about how they can read things differently depending which hat they've got on. So it sort of moved them beyond surface level analysis. They can sort of see the complexities. And then the one that I really love, this piece of feedback, is that it inspired collaboration and debate. So some students decided to work together to make Blackout poems of the extracts from the novel. And this again encouraged them to sort of debate their choice of words that they were keeping visible and those that they were redacting. And then they had to sort of negotiate in order to come to a consensus about the Blackout poem that they wanted to create and discuss. So again, you can sort of see here how this type of activity, it's not only helping them to develop their academic reading skills, but also like their debating skills, their discussion skills, their public speaking skills, all these different things are sort of playing into this type of activity. So on that note, I will pass you over to Nathalie. Nathalie, I don't think you're going to have access to click, so do you just want to tell me when you want me to move on?
I shall then. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is really interesting. The first time I saw Aimee present was at a Pedagogies and Pancakes breakfast, and so started to think about how can we actually use this, because I think it's quite a powerful method, and maybe to reflect back on a bit of the conversation we had yesterday. So when I introduced it in my own course to colleagues who are also my students, someone said, oh, it's just basically like reverse highlighting, and I try to explain, no, it's actually much more complex, because for me, it's an iterative process. I don't know if you would agree, Aimee. So it's a more iterative process, and there is a much more deliberate decision making, because we were talking, Aimee and I were talking about, we seem to have the same inflection as undergraduates and with the highlighters. I just used multiple colors, but it's a much more deliberate decision-making process, and you really have to think about what you want to black out, particularly if you're using the black marker blackout, because once that's gone, it's gone. And so that encourages a more in-depth engagement with the text. And so, yes, it's not just reverse highlighting, it is a more complex and engaged process. So yeah, I started, and it actually helped me with my own reading focus. And then I was, and I show you one example after that. It actually helps me with translation. So I'm from Germany, and I very often read German texts that are unfortunately not translated into English. And I try to write little reviews or summaries on my blog in English, so to share with colleagues, with English-speaking colleagues. And yes, the translation can be difficult. I talk about it later. So it can actually be used for translation because it really makes you think about particular complex texts. I've had a chat with colleagues from computing science about the possibility of you using it to teach coding, programming language, because there's syntax in there, there's grammar, there's things students can have to unpick. And when I talked about this in our course, we might get an example from a colleague later in the year. So hopefully, if they go and experiment with it, I will encourage them to share. The other thing is you can also use it for data analysis. I don't know if any of you are familiar, for instance, with thematic analysis. So that could be, for instance, used to help you develop codes in your data. But I was also thinking, and back to Sarah, we had the CPD session on the person who was singing, who was a voice artist. And I was actually thinking on a similar note that the poetry could also be a much more tacit way to interpret textual data. And so there are so many possibilities behind that. I don't know if you want to add something, Aimee, before we go to the next slide, or otherwise just move on.
Yeah, no, I think I said to you yesterday that your suggestion of using it for thematic analysis just mind-blowing to me, and I can't wait to try it out. So yeah, thank you for that idea.
You're welcome. Yeah, I want to try that actually as well. Could we go to the next slide, and then I just share with you how I use this for translation. So German academic text can be very, the language can be quite cluttered. So high standard academic German can be very, very different from just normal German. Even I find the difference is even worse than between academic English and standard English. And so translating it can be an absolute nightmare, also because we have a propensity for quite complex nouns, as some of you may know, and they just don't exist in the English language. There's very often not even an equivalent or a proximity, a word that comes to the close proximity of the translation. So, and there was this one chapter I wanted to synthesize and talk about because I thought it was quite interesting, and I could not translate it. I could not get the hang of it. So I thought, and that was shortly after visiting your session, Aimee, and I decided to use Blackout poetry for that. And as you can see, I used the method one of your students used, Aimee, where I didn't completely black it out, because I thought in translation work, sometimes you might need to be able to see the context for a little bit longer. And if you want to go to the next slide, this is then the German poem I came up with. And I found it was easier to translate a poem for some reason. I don't know why. So this is a mechanism I still want to poke at. But for some reason, it was easier to translate it. And maybe it is because poems don't need to be literal. You can translanguage. So you don't have to be explicitly literal with them. And so maybe that's what made the translation easier, because it just needed to bring across the meaning and not the actual words. And so that helped me to step back from that bit of translation. And in the next slide is the last of my slides. This is then the paragraph I wrote based from the text. So I'm thinking, so I've started thinking about using this actually as for translanguaging, so the movement between different languages. And that the Blackout poetry can really help with it, because it forces us to step back from trying to be literal with these translations, and helps us to really think more about what does the text actually mean. And I think for scientific papers, that can actually be really useful also for your students to step back from being stuck on the one difficult word or on that one phrasing of a sentence that is maybe too cluttered or maybe too complicated. And it helps to take that step back from that and really think more about can I still grasp the meaning even if I don't understand maybe this word or that word in the text. And so yes, I think there's a lot of power in that particular method. And this was the example I wanted to share with you, using it for translation as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Nathalie and I've spoke quite a lot about this, but I just think it's so creative to use this method for translation. It's, again, something that I would never have thought to have used this method for. So on that note, we wanted to have an activity that gives you the opportunity to actually have a go yourself at making your own Blackout poem. And please do get as creative as you want, make it as you want, and just play around and see how you can do it. And it would be really great to see how you do it, because I think what will hopefully come across in the conversation is that we can all use it in very different ways. So what we would encourage you to do is to, we've got a source that you can use, or you can use your own one, it's up to you, but focus on the source that you're reading and identify maybe some key themes and issues within it. And just remember, there's no correct answer, so just go with what speaks to you. You may have bought your own source materials, and that's absolutely fine. Please do make use of that. But if you would rather use a source that we've got a speech from Greta Thunberg, which you can use. It's I'll pop the link in the chat in a moment, or you can click the slide and you should get the hyperlink. And then we've also created a sort of Padlet page where you can share a copy of your Blackout poem, so you can see one in others, if you want to share it, that is. And again, we can see the differences in how you've approached that activity. So just to give you a few example methods that you might want to use. So if you've got your own source, you might want to do the sort of using a Sharpie or some kind of pen or paint or crayon, whatever you want to use, to redact your source text, or you can do it sort of digitally by just opening up like a Word document or some kind of whatever word processing tool you use, and hide the words that you don't want to keep, either by using the sort of highlighter tool or just by turning the text into a lighter colour. So while I get the link in the chat for you, does anyone have any questions about that, about the activity or about the method that you would like to ask? Let's try and leave the
Aimee, Anna had a question if there is do you have any guidance of how much needs to remain or be blacked out? Sorry, I can't think of the word right now. Yeah. I think it's quite text dependent. What you would say, so because some texts have much more information density than others. So.
Yeah, I would agree. It's really up to you. So some people leave a lot of words behind, and that's okay. Other people only leave a couple of words behind. It's really what jumps out at you. So if you're identifying a theme in the text that you're redacting, and it only needs a few words in order to communicate that, then that's fine. But if you want more, that's okay. And you'll see from other people's as well. Right, so that's not going to send, is it? Hang on. What I'm going to do, because I think Outlook is going to be difficult and I can't seem to attach a file, is I'm just going to copy and paste the link to the speech. So just copy and paste the speech into like a document, and you can redact it on that. Let me know if you're having any issues. And then I'm going to pop the link to the Padlet for you to share your poems as well. So hopefully you can all access that. So we've sort of set aside 20 minutes for this activity just to give you the time to think about what it is that you're doing, and to read the source text, either the one that you've got or the one that we've provided. So if we join back together at 11, that will give us plenty of time to discuss our poems that we've made, and also think about the opportunities and the challenges. But I'll be here, so if you have any questions, yeah, please do ask them. Clock, I don't know about you, Sarah. Am I in the future, or are you at the same time?
No, it's 6 minutes past here as well.
Okay, well, should we jump back in once Nathalie's back?
Yep, sounds good.
There we are. Nathalie's back in a lovely room that I wish I had. Okay, so Nathalie, have you had a look at the Padlet?
I did. And now, of course, I don't have the browser open. Yeah, so it's really interesting. I liked Sarah's poem as well, and I like how different they are.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the one from the scientific paper?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Yeah. It's I always love doing this activity with scientists, because the words that they focus on are very different from the ones that I focus on.
Do you mean there's the junk paper?
What was that, sorry?
Do you mean there's the junk paper? That's the one at the end.
Yeah, is it this
Yeah. So actually what I did with that one was, this is the paper that I've set my students to read next week.
Oh, okay.
And I thought I would just check which of it is actually useful, and a lot of it is not.
Yeah.
Which leads me to wonder whether it's a good paper, because they have to wade through a huge amount of stuff in quite archaic language before they actually get to the few points I want them to take away from the paper. So that's something that I have been thinking about, but I think this exercise would help me kind of like figure out what papers are actually good to set. These are level 2 students, so they don't need something too complex. This is a review article. They need something that they're going to get the stuff and they're actually going to enjoy reading. Whereas I wonder, it just echoed with me what you said, or about students not knowing how to read. But if I don't set them readings that are readable, not going to help either. So.
And that's such an interesting reflection, perhaps, to share with them as well, because often, I know when I was an undergraduate, you almost you sometimes, and still feel this, but you feel like if you're struggling to understand something, that it's you. But actually, if your lecturer is coming out and saying, actually, this is a really difficult paper to read, it's not not very useful for our purposes, actually that will probably really resonate with them and make them feel like it's not just them. But I love how you're using it to help you sort of prepare the material that you want to include in the session. That's yeah, it's really interesting how it can be used in that way. So sort of that's fed us on very nicely, actually, to the sort of few discussion questions. Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I've turned the cameras on.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's one thing that I keep thinking about, is whether you have the students do it or whether you do it yourself, and what stage you involve the students. Is it the critical analysis? So then essentially you can come out of it saying, this is a bad paper, just like, sorry, what was it, Helena just said, or do you have them do it and then they reflect on it, as what the message was?
Yeah, exactly. Again, thinking about how you want them to use it, and getting them thinking about why it might be useful. And apologies, I'm not used to Zoom. I didn't see your hand up, so thanks for shouting at me, Nathalie. No, I didn't see. I've just seen now that you can do it so that you can see all the cameras, so I can actually see it now. I use Teams. Zoom is not, I'm not used to it. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share their experiences of the activity? How you found it? Did you love it? Did you find it frustrating? What were your experiences?
I mean, I love it. I use Blackout poetry a lot, but as you might have gathered, I don't really do it to get the literal meaning. Yeah, what I find is it's not necessarily the actual poem that's the most useful thing for me. It's the way that I really, really hyper concentrate on text in a different way. And it doesn't frustrate me like trying to understand the meaning, just going over the words. It's a very, I can't explain it, but I think anybody who's tried it, I can see Helena nodding away. And I just wonder how you would do this with, say, your level 2 students, Helena, and get them not to understand. It's not the frustration not understanding everything. Yeah.
Well, my go-to has been to encourage people to start with questions and then skim read, but I'm not particularly sure that they are skilled at skim reading. See, skim reading just comes naturally to me. I would skim over this text and I would just highlight. So when I heard what this was about, I was like, oh, this is very interesting, because that's pretty much how I read. I black out in my mind most text and just focus in on the important things. But actually thinking about it, that must be a skill that I have picked up over many years of practice. So how do I get my students to do this? And so when somebody was talking about like the idea of reverse highlighting, that's kind of resonates maybe as well. I know you said, Nathalie, that's not what it is, but it's a kind of like, you know, how do you pick out the most important things and black out the things that are not? And you do that with a purpose. You know, so some of the things that I was almost thinking that I would use it, sorry, this gets into the other discussion part, was things like I asked students, you know, to focus on key things in reading. So generalizability, for instance, or who the participants are or what the methods are and things like that. And it's a kind of like, well, just highlight everything in the text. That's the methods. Or that tells you the task that people were able to do. So not all the methods, but just the task and things like that that your participants were supposed to do. And I think that might potentially be quite interesting, just get them to focus. So at the moment, I've been doing it with, you know, with setting questions and instructions and stuff like that. But I wonder if this physical activity would just get them the skill that they need to be able to do that themselves.
I can't see if there's another hand up. I don't think there is. Yeah, I love that idea. And it's about breaking that text up, isn't it? Because often when we skim read, you are sort of being more strategic in how you're reading, aren't you? Because you're glossing at different sections in an article, for example. So it might be getting them to focus on the methods, like you said. So again, it's that strategic approach to reading rather than reading absolutely everything, just to get, it can help you to get that
sense initially.
I've just seen a message in the chat as well from Colette about making Colette think about what they were reading, and it's almost like trying to pick out the meaning behind the text in a few words as possible, while still trying to get the meaning. And that made me think, from that comment, one of the issues that I'm having at the moment in my PhD chapter is it's quite a big chapter. And I'm thinking about how I can maybe condense some of those larger quotations that I've included. And Colette has just made me think that, well, actually, I could do this blackout poetry activity on those, you know, chunks of text that I've been quoting to see if I can still get the same meaning across from their words without using 300 words. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's just got me thinking. Is there any other I guess thoughts and experiences that anyone would like to share about how they found this activity? And if you've been using it before this session, then obviously please do share that as well.
Sorry, if I can maybe just come quickly up in between the labourers working outside my neighbour's garden. So if there was huge noises and banging, it's not my house collapsing. But I attended a workshop on Blackout poetry as a research method, data analysis last year. I think Angela was giving it, and it was brilliant. I used it in my collaborative research project, and it was iterative. It was sort of liberating and like really showing us transformative in many ways. We were analysing our own reflections, and it really it was really useful, and it was just exactly what you said, that kind of deep reading it many times, focusing on what is it that's coming through that resonates with me, what I think is really important, how I feel, is those kind of glowing moments, that kind of rhizomatic analysis a little bit, the glowing bits rather than patterns. And that was a wonderful experience, and really really it felt creative and liberating for teaching and learning. I've not used it before, but I'm really intrigued, and I think I've enjoyed it as a researcher. I think the students would really enjoy just blacking things out and focusing on their own. For me, what was interesting is when we used the same text, Greta's speech, and we have different poems, and that kind of shows, it could potentially show to students, well, when we read text, there is no potentially one way of reading the text. Is we read it because we bring our lived experiences and biases and beliefs into the text, and this is the engagement with the text, and it's okay. So for you, the message is, I'm the lucky one. For me, the message is maybe something different, but we can talk about it, and we can talk about how we can engage with that text on those different levels, and how we can use it. So potentially giving the students this, one essay title and 3 sources. We can have 300 different essays, because it is okay, and it is absolutely possible to bring yourself, and we should, to bring yourself to the text, engage, and then produce something with the focus that you believe is important. If you believe it's important, your writing will be better.
I love that, and it's that idea again of understanding our agency as readers and how we bring our own meaning to a text. And I think you were mentioning Angela Reid there. Yeah, so our colleague at Keele, Angela, she was the one that sort of transformed my view of what academic reading is. And the thing that really has stuck with me is this idea of having a conversation, a scholarly conversation with the text that we're reading. And I think this activity really enables that, because as you said, we can, sorry, we have a cat. Hello, yes, come on. Come on. Sorry, everyone. She wants fuss. As you said, we could have 300 versions of the same, 300 the same text 300 times, but produced a very different poem would be produced based on who has made that poem. And I think it comes back to that idea of having that critical conversation and realizing that actually we bring our own interpretations and meanings to that reading. Nathalie, you popped a message in the chat. Did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, it's just I misheard because my audio is a bit wobbly what Ivona had said about the rhizomatic experience, and for some reason my brain just picked out somatic, and I was thinking actually, and you were also talking about bringing yourself to the text, but I also think it's quite, I'm wondering how much that links also with embodied learning, particularly if you do this physically, and engaging with the text in a physical manner, much different to just reading, particularly to just on a screen reading. And I wonder if that has an impact on the information processing and understanding. I see Helena you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, I was actually just wondering when you were talking there, Aimee, about the differences that like different people here are using it for. So my first instinct is to have a very directed approach, is read this text with this in mind. And when you were first talking, was like, science papers aren't rich enough to put your own things into it, but actually that's not the case. because there are biases and things like that. It's just that the text tends to be quite summarized compared to like a novel or rich speech or things like that. So I'm just wondering, I don't think always there would be, maybe from a research report, there would be 300 different essays, but I think there might be themes of different kinds of approaches, but I think it might be more limiting. But I still think it's a really, really great technique. I just started thinking about if you direct it too much, maybe that takes away some of the things for the person experiencing it, but maybe at different levels, you need to do it differently. So maybe when you're first doing it and you're doing it for more sciencey text, it maybe needs to be more directed, and then later on is the freedom of reading it from different perspectives. But yeah, no, anyway, very inspirational. So thank you.
I completely agree, and you've hit the nail on the head there. When I was doing this session with first year undergraduate students, it was quite directed. I said, look, we're going to be doing some character analysis. They had the option to choose the character that they wanted to focus on, but they were asked to use it for character analysis. And I know Nathalie has been speaking obviously about using it for the purposes of translation, but also speaking to your colleague about using it to learn coding. So I guess another form of translation, really, isn't it? So that idea of directing it and sort of scaffolding it is really crucial. But then, of course, again, if it's something that people are more familiar with, you can give that, much more scope to do what they want with it. But I think that's what I quite like about the speech, the Greta's speech that I've copied and pasted in, because I was saying earlier that the way that a scientist had read that speech and produced their Blackout poem was very different to how I'd gone for a more sort of emotive and sort of thematic approach, whereas they'd focused in on the CO2 and stuff like that. But yeah, I think you're very right. It's how we set it up and the agency that we give learners to play around with it. Are there any other hands up? I think we've established I'm not very good at Zooming. Does anyone want to talk about regardless of what source they've used to make their Blackout poem, what words that you've selected and which words you've excluded and sort of, I guess, what your rationale was? Would anyone like to share their thoughts and reflections on their Blackout poem? I can just see that there's some comments going on in the chat that I've not seen about there being biases in scientific work that needs more emphasis and how this activity might unearth them. Yeah.
I just chose a book that I couldn't really get into because of just the font it's printed in and stuff that makes it difficult to read. And after everyone was talking about how that encourages them to read text they didn't like, I thought, okay, I'll try that out with one paper. And actually, again, it's this, you engage, you take a step back instead of feeling all that pressure of you have to read that text like word by word by word, and you have to really, it helps you to take the step back from it and just interrogate the text instead of just reading every single word on it. And there is a difference in there, and I cannot, I still can't really grasp how that, how to describe that even.
I mean, that just picks up on something that I was saying earlier about something a student has said to me about how they really hated the primary text that we were looking at, reading for that week. And this, for them, was a way into the text. It was a way to engage with it and almost take their frustrations out on why they didn't like it, because they could use it to like make their arguments about the text. So yeah, I think whether you like or dislike a text, it can be a way to engage with it in a creative and a productive way. Should we move on to we've already started to think about how we can use this in our own teaching and learning context, but it would be really great if we could just explore it a little bit more, and I guess I could learn the different ways that it can be used. And I sense that we've got a lot of different people in the room, which I think is fantastic. So lots of idea sharing will be much appreciated. So if you go onto the Padlet where you shared your Blackout poem, I've included these questions on the Padlet. So please do feel welcome to share your thoughts there, and it can be something that we can all refer back to if we'd like to. But would anyone else like to talk about how they, have or might adapt this method of reading in their own context? So we've got data analysis that we've already spoken about, translation. Are there any other ideas? Is that a hand, Natalie? I'm not sure. You've got a yellow box around your camera for me.
No, that usually means that the microphone is on that person, but I have my microphone switched off, which is very strange. So no.
Perhaps if we maybe have a couple of moments just to think, and then we can always share. see lots of comments are being added to the Padlet, so we'll spend a few more minutes just adding our responses, and then we can discuss them together.
Yeah, maybe we can share the Padlet after the course more widely. I don't know if that would be okay for people, because there are lots of good ideas in there as well.
Yeah, I'm just responding to a few of the comments here. I particularly love the idea of using it to make ethics forms accessible, so we can talk about that. Yeah, it's just so many ideas here. Oh, we've got a lit review cropping up. The dreaded lit review. Although I quite like them, but maybe I'm strange. I
always find them so boring to write. But yeah, maybe there's a way of going about it differently.
Yeah, you have to do a blackout poem, make a few blackouts, and then just merge them together in your document and say, here's my literature review. Just seen one of the comments about statistics and about data and how it's open to interpretation, and it's just got me thinking, all these conversations going on about AI and how, you know, that it is effectively made by humans, so it does involve some kind of bias. So using this type of method to think about the data that's produced, we can think about any biases that might be present in how that's been gathered. I can't see any more, you know, of the dots that jump up and down to say that people are typing. So perhaps if we unpick some of these responses a little bit more. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a look through some of the other responses in the Padlet, but just skimming through, we've got it being used for scientific papers, we've got it being used for reading ethics applications and understanding them to make it more accessible as a process. Got identifying key info in sections of dissertations, articles and essays, and then also, as we just mentioned, the statistics example, to analyze data and maybe identify any the different interpretations and biases that might come into that. And then there's another comment at the bottom of the Padlet. I particularly love this one about comparing what's important. So a lecturer might make their own Blackout poem, and then students can make their own as well, and they can compare them to see how people have read it and if there's any similarities or differences in interpretations. Does anyone want to I guess pick up a little bit more on what they've said they would be interested in using it for, to provide a little bit more context? Can't see any hands. Oh, Nathalie's got a hand. There we are.
Okay, I'll raise a hand then.
Very polite.
Actually, I might pick everyone's brains on that. So the ethics one that came to my mind because I'm running a model and we are building in the filling in of the ethics form. And the language in the ethics forms can be really challenging for people to actually, well, what is it they want to know? What does it actually mean? And I'm really wondering if a more in-depth engagement with a form like this would actually help unpick that, because I think we might get too stuck, and I include myself because I've been fighting with ethics forms for ages. Maybe we become too stuck on some of the for us maybe awkward phrasing, or trying to think too much or interpret too much in it. And I'm wondering if actually that might help us to take that step back to what is it I actually need to write down, instead of running through the phrasing over and over again and trying to figure out what it might be about. I don't know what people would think about this.
Well, I think I've added a response to that in the Padlet anyway, but I think that's a really good idea, because I think ethics applications tend to be very long, don't they? And the language that's used isn't always accessible if you don't know what it is that you're being asked to do. So I think, again, that close engagement with the application, focusing on particular words to understand that we know what it is that we're being asked to consider in our application. I think that's really crucial. But as you've been speaking, Nathalie, you've just made me think, wouldn't this be such a fantastic activity for people who make ethics applications or any type of form, to think about how they're actually constructing these documents, and all the information that they're including. Is all of that information necessary? Is the language clear? So actually we can almost flip it around and get people to think about how they're putting these applications together. Just a thought. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion, but it just made me think.
I think it's actually really good, but it just gets me to think again, okay, so if I write guidance, sometimes the guidance makes total sense inside my head, but does it necessarily what I've in terms of how I have written it down? Yeah. So maybe actually, it could even be used as a little check on yourself. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of raised earlier in the discussion anyway, about using it to decide what reading that we're assigning. Is it actually the best source that we can be sharing with students for their learning? So yeah, I think it feeds in nicely to that as well. You can see that we've got a comment or question in the chat from Helena. So I have a question about international students. Have you any experience in using it with people who are not as comfortable reading English? Nathalie, I think I might direct that question to you if you're okay, because I know you do lots of translation work.
It's really weird, but this is so personal. I haven't done this with international students, but for me, I've always felt it was easier to write poetry in English than in German for some bizarre reason, and I don't know why, and that might be highly personal. So I don't know, it might be worthwhile trying it out actually and see what their experience is. Again, it might be something. So what I have done with international students when I was in a similar role Aimee has right now is I took master's students in Masters of Science students into the art gallery, and there was an exhibition on an artist who did a lot of word art, you know, like graphics and word graphics and text. And I actually asked them to, because I wanted them, so the problem with the international students I worked with was they were focusing too much on individual words, and if they couldn't understand a single word, and they would spend ages. And I noticed for myself, once I spent 3 days trying to translate a word from German to English, and then ended up writing 1.5 pages instead of using that one word. But they were trying to focus too much on a single word. But I took them in a gallery and I was talking to them about looking at phrasing, at formulation, on looking at some of the descriptions and say, what speaks to you? You know, what is it that draws you to that specific text or to this specific phrasing? And help them basically, it's basically, I think, a similar principle on taking that step back from being overly focused on a single word or on the meaning of a single word. And in that regard, I could see that it might work, but I also see Ivona has her hand up, so she might have actually a much more experienced comment.
Yeah, thank you. I don't actually. I do work predominantly with international students. I'm in English for academic purposes, so kind of teaching reading skills and writing argumentation, looking for argumentation, different disciplinary texts is my job. But I have a group of refugee students going into our widening participation access course in September, and it's a pilot study. So I have students who have really diverse backgrounds, and I'm actually really keen to use that poetry with one of the texts that we are going to use for them to produce as sources for them to produce an essay, because I think I'm really keen. I actually think, although I'm not a native speaker myself, and in a way, I agree with Nathalie. Some things are much easier in English than they are in my native language. Part of me thinks that perhaps it's the emotional connection that we have. I'm not, I may be good at English, but I'm not a bilingual in the sense that my children are. And I learned English as an adult, not as a part of sort of growing up language at home. So the emotional connection to words is different. That's why I want my children to speak, to say certain things in Polish and not in English, because in English, I love you sounds the same to me as close the door. Do you know what I mean? The emotional connection is not there, and I wonder whether poetry being so such kind of activity related and rooted in emotions and a kind of interior life has something perhaps to do with it. I don't know, but I don't have experience, but I want to try this with those students, and I think it would. I hope it will work. I'll try and add on to the Padlet when it does. It's in May, so it's not so far away from now. I think it could. I think it could really, really well, because. But I would do it as like I suggested in a Padlet. I think I would do it myself, and then I will show them what I've done, and we'll look at sort of what is it that I paid attention to and why. What is it that they kind of scaffolded a little bit more for them, and then we can decide sort of what words they omitted, what words I omitted, and if they have omitted anything that I perhaps felt it was really important to understand the argumentation of the overall text and how that could help them. But sorry, not really directly answering the question, not from experience, but I'm really keen to do that. I think it could work.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm interested in is just because I've noticed, so there is a difference in how the international students that I teach versus the English speaking students that I teach, or, people who are more comfortable in using English. But I don't know if it's a learning culture as well, but people come and the text is important. It's like the word that's there. And I wonder if, I don't know. So this is why I'm asking, because I don't know how they would take to this approach. You can be creative with the text. You're allowed to be creative with the text, because it's just this creativity, that sort of synthesis and creativity that I often find is a little bit lacking, or certainly a barrier that we have to get over later on. It comes a little bit, and I'm wondering. So I don't know, basically, is how would they take it? Would they take this creative opportunity, or would that intimidate and worry them? Because that's the one thing, sometimes with creative things, when you're the subject I teach is psychology. So when people come in, they need to learn a lot of vocabulary, they need to learn a lot of ideas, they need to learn to think in a slightly different way, they need to approach things from a slightly different way. And sometimes a lot of the students that I get, it's their first semester in the UK, actually, they're MSc students. And so they haven't necessarily done psychology before, but they are MSc students. So sometimes I don't know, I'm trying to predict whether this will be a fun thing for them to do, they would just run with it, or whether for some of them it would just cause worry because they're kind of like from a very different learning culture. Yeah. And just interesting. Don't know.
I would quickly pick up, because for me, the operative word here was, you said allowing. And I think maybe this is one of the things, you as the educator in this position, you're holding that power position of gatekeeping, and you can allow your students to play, and I think if you are setting that environment right, and maybe explain also to them that this is something you want to try to actually that helps them to understand text better, then it may feel like something, that is more play, that is less, scientific, but actually there is system to the madness. There is, there is a purpose for it. And maybe giving this permission, maybe that will help them to engage with it. It might, it doesn't mean that they still won't feel weird about it, but maybe there is something to lower that threshold a little bit.
Yeah, it's just anything I can do to get people to take their own perspective, that they don't feel that they have to take the perspective of the teacher, that so I'm always looking for activities to do that, because as soon as we can breach that barrier, that means that there's a lot more exciting things that happen in the class. But it's kind of like that's quite a barrier that I sometimes perceive, and so you have to teach in, so it affects the way that you teach as well, because you become the information provider, whereas actually what is much better is if they have some of that role as well. And it's just getting students. I might try this and see if that might just help them jump into that stream a bit more easily. Yeah. I was just gonna say, next year you're going to come back and you're going to have a very traumatized Helena saying, I tried this and they all hated me.
Just to pick up on what you said there, it's definitely something that I've encountered with students in English literature, where you would think that they might be maybe a bit more open to this type of activity. Some of the students were really anxious when I said to them, look, let's just, let's make a Blackout poem of this. Obviously, I set the activity up more than that, but they were quite anxious because they were worried about doing it wrong. That came up in the conversation. I don't want to do it wrong. And I said, it's not a wrong answer with this. And again, it was about what Nathalie said about almost reminding them of their agency, and actually they can play around with this text and they can interpret it. And I know I'm talking from a sort of English creative background here, but to remind them that the way that they read the text might be very different because of their experiences, the way that they interpret things. But again, it was about, I don't want to say giving permission, because they have their agency, but yeah, it really is just reminding them that they can do this. And I think what I found from experience was actually they might be a bit anxious to begin with, but once they get into it and they start exploring the poems together, I found that anxiety reduced. And actually, as I said, students were then going on to use this activity to plan their assessments. I didn't ask them to do that, they just decided to. So yeah, I think you do raise an important point. There may be some worry about this because it might be a completely new way of reading for people. But actually, just encouraging them to play and to explore, I think is the way that I've been able to navigate this situation.
Sorry, I was just going to maybe connect what you and Nathalie said together there, because maybe this would be a way to teach them about the role of agency in education, or in their, how they can actually, here's a fun little activity we can do. And the purpose of this is just to show you how you can start bringing yourself into the class, into what we're doing. Yeah. I might actually work, but yeah, the fear thing is definitely, I'm very, that's the thing. I'm happy to jump into any kind of thing and try any kind of thing, so unlike Colette, who said that she was worried about this when you said it, I was like, yeah, let's go for it. Let's just see what will happen. I'm not going to do it with an actual physical thing, so I can actually score out the mistakes I made, which is not, like the nature of it and stuff like that. But I have noticed that doesn't translate always for all my students. And it's not just the international students, there can be other students that are like that as well. It's a personality thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly. You've summarized it really nicely there. It's I think the worry is encountered by students from different groups, whether they're international, whether they're home students. It's something that just the way that we set it up can really help them to embrace playing with a text. We have spoken quite a lot about the opportunities, but to sort of wrap up, would anyone like to share maybe some of their thoughts about some of the challenges that they might encounter? So we have already started speaking about maybe the anxiety and fear of doing something quite playful, but are there any other things that you feel might crop up with this type of activity, and how might you navigate that situation with students and colleagues? Reading through the Padlet to see if there's anything else. Yeah. Oh, someone's put about letting students submit anonymously. Yeah, I think that really does follow on from what we were just saying there, particularly if there's a little bit of anxiety involved about what they actually produce. By letting them submit anonymously, it's almost that freedom to give it a go without the pressure of it being attached to their name. So I think that's a really good suggestion. Let's see this message in the chat. Yeah, or show an awful example of one of our own first tries. That's a message from Nathalie. I've actually, I've got like a little, I guess, resource bank of Blackout poems that I've made. And I've actually been brave and done it in some of the actual texts themselves. That took me a few tries to do. But yeah, sharing it and even, I've been using Blackout poetry for a few years now, but even I, full disclosure, I tend to, if I'm doing it by hand, use a pencil before I go in with the paint or the black Sharpie pen. So even I'm a little bit anxious about, I guess, doing it wrong or not getting the poem that I want to come to at the end. Other times I'm a bit more sort of spontaneous about it, and I will jump in and be brave. But I think sharing examples and again showing the different ways of approaching it can be a way into it and to navigate some of that worry that might naturally come with this type of activity. I can see that Sarah's put a message in the chat as well about using a website, I'm guessing, to make Blackout poems from. Is this the one that you shared with me, Nathalie? Yeah. Yeah, so that's another way into it. You can almost get like a computer to do it for you. I can't see any more hands up, and I'm aware that we've got 5 minutes left until 12. So perhaps this is a natural place to close the session. Please do feel welcome to revisit this Padlet, add to it, read through, try the examples that have been shared. It'd be great to keep adding to it and to use it as a resource in our own context. But thank you so much for coming along today. It's been an absolute joy speaking with Nathalie over the last few years about this. So I'm really glad that I've been able to meet everyone here and continue these conversations with you. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you, Sarah, also for the opportunity to come along today.
And thank you very, very much, because it's been fabulous. I've asked Nathalie and Aimee if they'll share the slides so I can get those sent around. I'll share the Padlet and I'll share a link to the recording. Well, when I say I will, Fiona will send it all out probably later today. So yeah, thank you very, very much. I've loved this. It's just made my morning. Fancy being paid to do this.
Yeah, it's not so bad.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nathalie, as well.